Hello and welcome to the podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the organisation that's been the face of communal living in Britain since the 1980s. Whatever kind of intentional community you're interested in, whether it's communes, co-ops, co-housing or anything else, Diggers and Dreamers is where you begin. And now, here's our podcast host, Kirsten Stevens-Wood.
Join us for our discussion with two of the residents of Bridport Cohousing in Dorset. Lin Scrannage and Monica King tell of their journey from a group of people who came together in 2008 with a vision through to the enormous task of bringing together members, taking on planning, and the huge logistics of designing and bringing into life 53 new homes. Monica and Lynn talk us through the logistics of needing to raise money for the different stages of their project and how they are now in the final stages of realising their co-house. So today we are welcoming Monica and Lynn from Bridport Cohousing. Welcome to both of you. It's wonderful to have you here. I was wondering if we could maybe start out by just firstly introducing yourselves, who you are and how you came to co-housing. And then maybe we could have a kind of a trot through the beginning of Bridport Cohousing, how it came into being, and how you got involved. So shall we start with you, Monica?
Yes, thank you for giving us this opportunity to tell people about this marvelous scheme that we've been beavering away at for many years now. So I'm Monica King. I live in Bridport, and I got involved with this project in March 2009. At which point Bridport Cohousing was enlarging a steering group that until then had a few people that had been on a mailing list for a while. And the impetus came from Alan Hicks, who had called a meeting of the local authority and the local MP and planning officers and laid his cards on the table and set out what he wanted to do. The first time he tried it, they told him to go away. So when he went back a few years later, they said, go away and do it. So we took that as our trigger for, yes, let's, because obviously you want the local authority to be working with you, not and sympathetic to what you're doing. So that's how I got involved, and that's been going now for, was it 15 years, or are we at 16 now?
I think you might be 16 years actually. Yeah, indeed. And yourself, Lynn, how did you get started with this?
Okay, so probably in 2008, I started thinking about how I would come into the latter years of my life successfully, not having a family of my own and children and all of that. So I started just reading, looking around, thinking about it a lot, and not wanting to repeat my parents' mistakes. I came to the conclusion that co-housing was a pretty good way forward for me. And so I started to try and get a project of my own off the ground in the Welsh Herefordshire borders where I lived. Quickly realised it was going to take me at least a decade, and thought, well, I'll look around at other projects and see which ones closely sort of I have an affinity for. I had a checklist and went round staying in quite a lot of them around the country, and Bridport Co-housing ticked the most boxes for me. I started to try and become a member and quickly realised I was too far away. So I just put my house on the market, sold it, and moved into rented accommodation in the town, and thought it was going to be for 2 years. It turned into 8 years before. And Monica, all the way along, kept saying to me, there's no guarantee you'll get a house at the end of this, you know. And I just held the faith, and it all worked out beautifully.
That's an amazing commitment. Sell your house and move on the basis of a very early on project. That's amazing. But then sometimes it is that commitment that takes these things forward. So you both came in fairly early, 2008, 2009. Could one of you give me perhaps a sort of an overview of that journey for the last well, up until the point where you knew it was going to happen and that you started to get those spades in the ground.
Well, can I just say that I came in 2016, not
Oh,
2008. So Monica's had the full history, so she'll probably have more
So
detail about the beginning.
when people get involved in things like co-housing or some sort of project, I've noticed there are two issues that always crop up, and they are the land and the money. And we actually did fairly speedily came upon some sites and settled on one in the end. And the person selling it wanted to sell it to us because she wanted to. It was the last piece of land from her family farm, and she wanted it to be, a testimony to her values and something that she would be proud to give the town the benefit of. So we had her on side, and it was great because it took so long. There were many times when her family could have done with the money sooner, but they didn't sell to anybody else. They stuck to this and extended. I can't remember what it's called now. And when you they commit that they will sell to you.
Option, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So that was a relatively straightforward, but then the land itself had some difficulties, as with all pieces of land, and one of them was access. We spent many years negotiating with the NHS. First 2 years they wouldn't speak to us because they were involved in a major restructuring, top-down restructuring, and so eventually they did start speaking to us, but it still took years and years of negotiation. It was actually very helpful to know what the site was, because when we did any thinking and planning and working out what's needed, we knew what we were dealing with. And therefore that took out a whole load of difficulty. Whereas, if, and it's not a difficult site in that it's enclosed in it, got hedges all around. It's very it's distinctive. It's not like you're merging on anybody else's territory or anything. And it's on the edge of the town. And we wanted to be an exception site because we wanted to sell and rent affordable homes. But because the local authority had they didn't have a local plan in place, we ended up, on the several times we went to the planning committee, we ended up being given a standard planning permission that in some ways has made things a little trickier, but them's the breaks. And that's the thing about taking so long to do something. Things change. What's your things that you had put in place in year 3, in year 9 become irrelevant to the government. The government changes the rules. So, like all CLTs, we rely on using leasehold as a way of selling houses to people at a reduced level. So we've sold 14 homes at 80% of open market value, and the lease is what ensures that arrangement. And the government is trying to do away with leaseholds tenure because a local authority, some developers have been using it as a way of extracting money from people who've bought from them.
Yes. So no, that's really interesting. And I noticed that you used the term CLT, so Community Land Trust. So was that a decision? You said that the site itself made it really helpful to be able to make decisions about what how you would use the land. Did you make a decision about sort of your legal structure fairly early on? The decision to be a community land trust.
Yes, and we hadn't assumed which one we would arrive at, so we looked at them all. We had a lot of help from Martin Field because his yellow book was the standard text at the time, and we decided that we wanted to be a community benefit society because we felt that the fact that community benefit is a bit woolly, like who is the community, but actually, of course, it's people who live in it are the community, but also the wider community is the community that you're providing more housing for. And then we were happy with that. And when we went to the planners for the first time, they didn't know what co-housing was. We went and presented ourselves as co-housing. They were quite puzzled. And we tried to explain, but it was a bit like it made it hard. It was like they were having to learn a language to talk to you or something like that. So we went back soon after and presented ourselves as a CLT because that West Dorset has a huge number of community land trusts because it is a very rural area, and the model suits villages wanting to provide housing for their younger people or what have you. So we chose the CLT. We chose to go back as a CLT because we went to our MP and had because we'd asked him about tenure, and he said if you're a CLT, Community Benefit Society, therefore a CLT, you can have a local lettings policy, which means we can say who lives here. So we have a whole set of criteria. Mostly we conform to the local authorities' criteria for housing, but there are some whereby we can say that we want at least 40% of our homes occupied by families with children. We want no more than 40% of members households with people over 60, because we were trying to get a intergenerational neighbourhood. So going back as a CLT, they had more confidence, the planners, the second time round. They understood what we were trying to do.
That's really interesting. So you adapted to the knowledge of your planners in order to sort of squeeze your project through their understanding. Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And I wonder whether the you reference Martin. I've got a copy of Little Yellow Martin's book on my bookshelf, but actually since then there's been the more recent guide that was done in partnership with Diggers and Dreamers and the co-housing, which I wonder would be extremely useful to groups going through the same process as you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, really good. So you managed to get planning. You had your piece of land, and for those people who perhaps haven't visited you, you have to pass. Well, it's now a road, isn't it? But you would have had to pass over what was technically NHS owned land to get to your plot. So you had to negotiate access. And then you eventually got planning permission for quite a significant number of houses.
Yes, the first time we went, we were actually looking for 34 because our site is 7 acres, just over 7 acres. And we figured you could get 2 co-housing neighbourhoods on it. So we thought we bought the first half and then did a plan and took that to planners. And then because so much time had passed, we began to get cold feet and thought, we know developers are very clever, skillful negotiators. We would hate to think that we would lose control of the other half. So we decided to plan for the whole site. So we went back the second time for 53 homes. And yes, we're going over the hospital land. We had an access road, but it was basically a farm entrance and a farm gate, and coming up a green lane. It was, a sunken lane, and so it was much more convenient. In fact, it was in response to when we did a planning for real exercise and took our project to the local people and to the town at the market. We had a market stall and told people on a Saturday morning what we wanted to do. And they said, "Why do you want to go all the way up that lane? Why don't you just go over in the right-hand corner?" And so that gave us grounds for going back and saying, right, we've changed our plan because of what local people have said. So that was a very helpful context to change our thinking.
Yeah, and I wondered if maybe you would be able to tell us a little bit about the money side of co-housing. So obviously, buying 7 acres of land is in itself a very expensive undertaking, but to then go on to become a developer for over 50 houses is quite mind-blowing, actually, for the average individual. I wondered if one of you might be able to sort of start us off with how does one begin that process?
Do you feel able to speak to that, Lynn?
Well, I can speak to a little bit of it. The land, we were able to buy the land the second, particularly, I remember coming in at the time of buying the second piece of land, which was about, I don't know, what was that, about 3.5 acres.
Yeah.
It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, and we put out a plea to our family, friends, people in the community to make us a loan of, how much was that loan? Was it
We
150,000?
right. The thing is that what you're talking about is when we raised money for the first half of the land, and so we actually raised 250 grand, and that was what we needed. So
Wow.
so we had a mailing list, and that's what Lynn's referring to, that we asked people who knew us, our relatives. One of my daughters put some money in. It was, but it was lovely because people are showing their faith in you. It was just,
Yeah.
and our members put in money as well.
And within 3 weeks, we'd got the £250,000, had landed. It was just astonishing. We were delighted, obviously. That was buying the land, and then we had all these loans to service. So when we came further into the project of the development stage, we would manage to. It was a big tranche of money that came out from the government, that registered providers could get their hands on to build houses. And we got our hands on a load of grant money, but we weren't a registered provider, and we agonized for a while about whether we should become one. And in the event we didn't, we now wish we had, I think, most of us, because it would have given us a lot more control, without having to have a partner to deal with. So what we did was we found a housing association that fitted with our values, and at the time, and we gave them our grant money and said, you take the grant money, you build most of the houses. So Bridport Cohousing managed to build 14 houses by actually taking out a loan from a bank, and then when we moved in, we paid the money back, and we got rid of that loan quite quickly. The housing association used the grant money to build the other 13 shared ownership houses and 26 rental houses. And then what other money delights do we have? How do we build our common house? It's the key thing for a co-housing project to have a common house. It's so important to get that community glue to consolidate the whole neighbourhood. And 53 houses, well, they're not all houses, houses and flats. That's more than most conventional co-housing groups have. And they reckon 30, 35 is a good number because it just works that way. So we knew we were taking a big risk by building so many. But, and also we couldn't get the finance together to build the common house.
So just very quickly, for those people who perhaps are not as familiar with co-housing as we all are. So as you say, Lynn, the co-housing is this kind of critical part where everybody, quite often people will have very slightly smaller houses than they perhaps would have lived in previously. And part of the co-housing
arrangement is that there's this co-house which quite often has a large enough space to accommodate, if not all community members, significant amounts, usually meeting, eating, sometimes office space, sometimes they have rentable spaces within them. It's like a sort of your own personal community centre that's on a part of co-housing, and that was the part that you needed to raise additional money for.
Money has always been a huge challenge for us. So 20, when was it? 2 years before we moved in, we put out a share offer, a community share offer via the FX platform. They have a huge database of ethical investors looking to put money into projects such as ours. And as we needed money to pay back the land loans, we needed money to build a common house, and we also needed money to buy 2 guest bedrooms off the housing association who had built them. We figured we needed quite a big piece of money, and we put the share offer out. In the event, we got £350,000 worth of investment back. So that enabled us to pay off the loans and enabled us to start the build for the common house. So we got involved with a couple of local architects who had recently finished their training, and we met them through the Hook Park, which is a place nearby in Dorset, and architects go there after they've finished their training, and they do innovative builds. So we hooked up literally with a couple of these innovative young designers, because the housing, the common house that we got planning permission for was too expensive for us. We couldn't afford to build it. It was beautifully designed by a previous architect, but it was just unaffordable. So we had to reapply for planning permission to build a smaller, cheaper iteration. We had to reapply for planning permission several times because we kept finding that it was still too expensive. So in the end, we've come up with a very simple design built with natural materials, using regenerative building techniques, and it's just gorgeous. It's much smaller than we had hoped for. It hasn't got meeting rooms, it hasn't got rentable spaces. We've just basically got a big hall, a kitchen, a pantry, and a toilet. We're going to build a veranda around it and landscape the land around it, and it'll be stunning. We're just finishing off doing the flooring at the moment in the main room. So we're onto the kitchen next, and we hope to have it finished within the next 6 months.
And you've done that quite innovatively, I believe. So you've gone into a relationship with the School of Natural Building. Yeah. Do you want to talk to us about that as well?
It's been fantastic because, I mean, I'm 70 in my 72nd year. I've learned how to clay plaster a wall. Where else would you learn skills like that at my age? It's brilliant. And so many of us have come in. Some people make cakes to keep the workers going. Some people are highly skilled with carpentry skills, and some people like me are learning on the job. And it's really been fantastic to have mainly residents come in. We have had a few courses to get the building up. We ran 4 courses for the foundations, the line rendering, the clay plastering, and Strawberry.
Yeah, because I've visited your co-house, which is not quite finished yet, but it's quite an impressive build. So it's a timber frame with is it rammed earth tire foundations.
Tires.
straw bale infill, and then you're doing natural clay and lime rendering. So it's actually a really beautiful building. Do you feel that it is a different type of building, but that actually has it worked out? It feels like it's worked out very well for you.
So I would say we are delighted that we would have loved to be able to do the whole build in sort of. I fully admire Lilac in Leeds for their low impact building, and we would have loved to have done the whole in that sort of way. But at least we have got the common house. And it was ironic when our builders were finishing off building all our houses and doing the roads and stuff, and there was our alternative construction method going up in the middle of it. And I did ask the builders, what did it feel like seeing, and obviously for them it was like a bit like the moon in a way, it was entirely different to the way they've done things. But I mean, all our houses are timber framed, so there is the skeleton of each of our buildings has that much in common. I'm sorry, I may have wandered.
No, I don't think you did. But I was going to come in and just ask about how that made the affordability of the co-house. So you talked about raising lots of money, that you had to pay off lots of loans. It does sound like it's totally balancing all the time, this idea of taking out loans and then having to service them, and then maybe going out to a sort of community share offers. Maybe you could just describe to us how community share offers have worked for you as a community, and how you've built that into your plan.
I have to say that numbers are not my thing, but for a long time I had to work with numbers because there were very few of us involved. But now we've got to a stage where we've got more people on board who are at home with numbers. So lately I can sort of leave it to other people. But I have to say, when for the first loan offer we issued to people, when we issued a loan offer, many of our members thought, well, that's not going to be, that's not going to take us very far, is it? And so a lot of people were very surprised that we had raised 250 grand over Christmas in 3 weeks. Because people have put their trust in us, and we said to them, don't put money in that you can't afford to lose, because we've got this. There were no guarantees. There was a good rate of interest, but no guarantees. And a lot of people were just expressing their encouragement and wanting to see us win. So that was the first lot of money. And whereas working with ethics, that was slightly more complex, because we had to jump through lots of hoops to prove that we were a financially responsible group. And it didn't necessarily work out as we had imagined, because we wanted a certain amount, but in the end, a point where I'm struggling here because I want to speak freely, but not negatively. But we knew how much we wanted, and ethics said, therefore, they told us that our optimal amount was a certain figure, and then we had a lower figure and a higher figure. We actually needed the higher figure, but as soon as we'd got the optimal figure, everybody said, well done, you've done it, you've cracked it. And so I would say to people, you need be warned, be careful how you deal with it, because for some people they're still asking for money. Why are they still asking for money? It's because we were a bit naive and didn't realize how that would pan out.
So you weren't asking for extra, you were actually asking for what you needed.
Yeah.
But because of the way that the platform worked, you kind of gave the indicator that you'd met your minimum threshold. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting, and probably really helpful for other people.
Right, because I think I'm over the 15-16 years I've been writing a book in my head, and one of the chapters will be what we've learned. Maybe 3 of the chapters will be what we've learned.
I can't wait for that to come out. Lynn, do you want to maybe tell us about how the balancing of the share offers kind of pays for the house, but also how maybe you make sure that Loan. So just for clarity, loan offers are when people share offers, sorry. People essentially are putting in their own money. And I don't know whether you did it this way, but some share offers do it so that you can decide your own rate of interest. So some people can make it so it's very low and it's almost a gift, not a permanent gift, but it's still a loan. And other people can select a slightly higher interest rate. But the idea is that everybody benefits from that. Is that how it works for you?
Well, we have, in our terms and conditions, we have the option to review what level of interest we pay every year. So just a few weeks ago, we had the conversation: do we want to continue paying 4% to our investors? We could have gone down, but I mean, we've only just started paying them back. So it seemed very churlish to do that. So we decided to carry on paying the 4%, and the money to pay the investors back comes from the service charges that we raise. So that's another whole area of income that we get from everybody who lives here. We will have to pay a service charge. We try and keep it down as low as possible by doing a lot of the work ourselves, which is what co-housing is all about. You volunteer so many. We have a couple of weeks, a couple of hours a week as a sort of a guideline for people to do some work, whether it's helping in the common house or whether it's doing some mowing of grass around the place or weeding of beds, because if we didn't keep it looking lovely, we'd have to pay contractors to come in and do that work. So we try and do as much as we can ourselves to keep the service charge down. It's in everybody's interest, so it's kind of a carrot that dangles.
And I doubt if I don't think we've got time for this in this particular podcast, but actually I know from the visit that you also have a microgrid, so you have lots of solar, and that there's a mechanism for sort of sharing that and having a relationship with your provider. You've got beautiful car-free streets, so that all the parking is on the outside, and it feels very lovely to walk through and not to have to navigate around cars. So that's really nice. And do you have a time when you think that your co-house will be finished? And just one kind of add-on to that, is that the end? Are you done, or are you thinking ahead?
No, we're always thinking ahead.
Mhm.
We're hoping to get the common house done by the end of the summer, finished, landscapes and everything. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. The next thing, we're trying to find a way to give guest accommodation to friends and relatives who want to stay here, because we've been unable to buy the guest bedrooms at the agreed price from the housing association. It's been something of a thorn in our side not to be able to have those guest bedrooms, because that's the usual thing for co-housing development, is you have smaller houses and have guest rooms. So we've got to be literally always thinking outside the box, and that's the beauty of the beast, really, because out of everything that seems like something negative, you get this amazing creative response coming from the membership. So we go out to people and we have circles and we say, well, what can we do? How can we get around this problem? What can we bring that's innovative and will serve the purpose? So we're thinking at the moment of how people we're building up a register of people who have a spare room and are willing to offer that to people who don't have it, like the people that live in the flats don't have any spare rooms. So they would like relations to come and stay. So that's one way. We may think about building a couple of glamping pods on the land if we can navigate that minefield of whatever planning permissions we'll need for that. But there's always ideas coming out. And we're currently doing a big permaculture exercise for our 2-acre piece of land at the top of the field, so that members can contribute to the vision and the design of that. So we're always busy. There's never an end to the jobs that need to be done. You can never sort of sit in a deck chair and put your feet up and anything. There's a thing to do.
So at the end of all of these podcasts, we ask the question from our guests, what's the sort of key learning that you take away from your experience? And is there any advice you'd give to people looking to do something similar? That's a huge question, actually, but I'm wondering whether both of you might be able to just select maybe one or two things of, what you've learned from your experience of being part of Bridport Cohousing, and anything you'd like to pass forward to those thinking about going into it. So can I'll start with you, Monica.
Mine is very simple. It's never give up. And you could apply that to anything. But what I've learned is that if you meet a stumbling block, then you try to go around it, you try to go over it, you do whatever. And often the things that you end up with are better than what you would have done if you'd actually been able to do what you'd originally wanted to do. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does probably mean it takes a year longer than you had planned, that sort of thing. But that's it, really, never give up.
Thank you. And what about you, Lynn?
My great learning has been patience, because you need buckets of it. Things always take 10 times longer than you imagine. And the nature of our sort of governance structure is we use sociocracy to speak to each other. And even getting a simple thing recently, one of the members is disabled, he's in a wheelchair, and he wanted to put an apple tree that he'd won in a raffle somewhere near his house where he could see it. Well, we have a big orchard that we planted up on the field, but he wanted to have this tree down, and it's been sitting in a bucket for months now, over the winter. It just takes so long for us to organise people to make the decision about where to put this tree. And we've found the site now. I saw his brother this morning, and it's going to be planted in the corner of the village green. But yeah, it's voices that you have to collect and take everything into account, and it just teaches you, don't hurry things along. Just wait. The time will come when it's right to do it, and everything is always perfect when it happens. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you both today, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the go-to place for intentional communities in Britain. As ever, it really helps us if you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, you can find out more about communal living at our website, diggersandreamers.org.uk. There you'll find an online directory of existing communities and developing groups within the UK, plus interactive notice boards and information about our publications. One you won't want to miss is the Diggers and Dreamers directory, which has been referred to as the Communard's Bible for 35 years. And now, to play us out, here are the Spaceheads with their tribute to our old mate, Gerard Winstanley. See you next time.